So we've got some results up from Nessus right here, and I want to take a look for anything that could potentially be a false positive. Now, a false positive is where we've got a situation where it reports something that may not actually be real. So as an example, you may have an Apache server that's configured to only say that it's an Apache server, not give a version number. And Nessus may take that and make some guesses about the version that is actually running and throw up some Apache vulnerabilities in here. And you'd have to go and make sure that the version you're running is actually one that's vulnerable. There are actually cases where you're going to get false positives, where Nessus reports something that's just not real. And a lot of these actually right here look pretty real, something that you may want to take a look at and look at in a little bit more detail. There are cases, though, where Nessus is going to report something that you may or may not care about, and to me, that's almost like a false positive. So in this case, we've got an issue where Nessus has reported a high-risk vulnerability with Ruby. And the thing about that is that the only reason Nessus knows about this is because we gave the login credentials for the server or the system to Nessus so that it could log in. It's the only way it knew about the Ruby vulnerability, and there are others that are similar. So the QEMU KVM vulnerability is another one. Nessus couldn't have known about that without actually having login credentials. So would you consider this a high-risk vulnerability if you actually had to be on the system and maybe you had a strong password policy in place? That may be a case where you downgrade the risk here, which doesn't mean that you shouldn't be recommending that patches get applied on a regular basis. But some of these may not be situations where they are critical vulnerabilities. And this is similar to a false positive. It actually is a real issue. The thing that's a little questionable is where you might actually rate that. So we do run into false positives from time to time, and that's a case where Nessus is relying on information that it's received. In the case of Apache, for example, it gets a banner back, and it may have to make some guesses about what that server actually is, what version that server is running. And so it may actually throw an alert up that may not be real, although most of the vulnerability scanners are pretty good about making really good guesses, but you still need to make sure that you're not running into false positives and go through your list of vulnerabilities from Nessus or Nexpose or any other vulnerability scanner that you're using, and just make sure you're not getting false positives. The vulnerability scanners are not infallible. And some of it has to do with configuration, some of it has to do with the way it interacts with systems. So always make sure that the list of vulnerabilities is actually true and accurate.